Hey everybody, I suppose it would help if I bring the microphone down. Whew. Hey everybody, a quick editor's note from the Air War podcast. Sam and I mistakenly opened up Zoom, and we've always thought that with the free version of Zoom that you get a 40-minute recording. So before we started recording the episode, him and I were talking a little bit about the episode, and it turns out that the free version of Zoom only allows for a 40-minute session whether you record it or not. So we were unaware of this, and there's a point in this episode where you hear us go, wow, that was a quick 40 minutes. It's because we really thought that we had been talking for 40 minutes, only to find out that we had burned up 15 of our free 40-minute session before we started recording. So that's why we have a shorter episode this time for the Air War podcast. I think this is around 25 minutes. Apologies in advance. We will be sure to not let that happen again. Lesson learned. Nonetheless, I think we pretty much got everything we wanted to say about this episode in those 25 minutes. So hope you enjoy. And we also want to say a huge thank you to all of our subscribers on Pursuit Picks Media. You guys have been absolutely awesome. There's been a lot of great feedback and comments, and I'm surprised at how well our little shitty podcast has picked up. It's not shitty because of Sam, but shitty because of me. I mean, we all know that. But we're so grateful for all of you who support us, and we're gonna try and keep this stuff coming, and try and make it better as time goes along. So, anyways, let's go ahead and get to this episode of the Air War podcast, where we review Masters of the Air Part 5. Should be a good one. Thanks again. Welcome, everybody, to the Air War podcast presented by Pursuit Picks Media. My name is Mitchell Barvich, joined by my co-host, Sam Allen. And let's get right to it. We're going to be talking about Masters of the Air, Part 5. And this is from the book. And if you just watched this episode, then a lot of this will sound familiar to you. We had a big rocket hole through the starboard wing. 2 engines were out. My 2 waist gunners were seriously injured, and my tail gunner had also been hit. Rosenthal later described the situation in royal flush. After we left the target, we were attacked again by fighters. Our gunners could not shoot an enemy plane down unless they had a stable platform. But if I had kept the plane level and stable, we would have been shot down. So I went into a series of maneuvers, every kind of evasive action. The plane was all over the sky. I guess the German pilots eventually got frustrated and decided to go for an easier target. The crew began barking over the interphone that the oxygen system had been shot out and that they were having trouble drawing air. Rosenthal told them to cut the chatter and that they were sinking so fast that they would not need the plane's oxygen in a few seconds. At that moment, co-pilot Winfrey Pappy Lewis turned around and asked the flight engineer for a report on their gas supply. He got no answer. The man's eyeballs were floating in their sockets, a symptom of oxygen deprivation. He didn't come around until they dropped to below 12,000 feet. In a situation like that, you don't think about dying, said Rosenthal. You focus on what you have to do to save the plane and the crew. You drive everything else out of your mind. You're frightened, but there's a difference between fear and panic. Panic paralyzes, fear energizes. You sweat, even at 50 degrees below zero. Your heart pumps. You act. Truthfully, the only fear I ever experienced in the war was the fear that I would let my crew down. People talk about courage, but that's a bunch of baloney. I wasn't courageous on the Munster mission. I had a job to deliver those bombs, and I did it. After that, my only concern was the 9 other men in my plane. How would I get them home? Spoken from a legend.
Can't say it better than that, can you?
No, you can't. And I think this was going to be, and I know that we still have 6, 7, 8, 9. So we got 4 more episodes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it'll get better than this.
It's going to be difficult to beat.
And I think that, and I guess we can call this a trilogy now because I've seen a few interviews where Hanks and Spielberg are referring to these 3 miniseries as a trilogy. So I know we still have the remaining episodes for this, but if we're going to make a list and we're going to rank them in order from best to worst, there's really no bad episodes, of course. But if you take all the 29 episodes, this is probably in the top 5 out of all the 3 of those series.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, because I think we can all agree that Band of Brothers is the strongest out of all 3 series. And I know that's very contentious because then I can see the look on your face.
Yeah, well, and we're not comparing here. We're trying not to compare because it's obviously it's different storylines. It's different characters. It's a whole different part of the war. But in terms of cinema, that was some of the best television I've ever watched.
Yeah.
And not just related to the Second World War. It really was amazing. It's the best of the best you're going to get with visual effects. And again, we had another 5 or 6 shots that were kind of While we're on that subject, let's talk about the slow motion.
See, oddly enough, that wasn't the worst part for the CGI for me. The worst part was when the B-17s were taken off. When they're that was pretty bad.
There is one shot where I think the camera is panning. Or it's not panning, it's moving with the B-17.
Yeah, is it Rosenthal's taking off?
Yeah. That shot was a little much. And that's it's 4 seconds of film.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
I've seen some comments that people didn't like seeing the debris in slow motion. And I don't think that was slow motion. I think the idea that they were showing there is that those pieces of the aircraft were in the slipstream.
Oh, okay. That didn't click for me.
Yeah. Which adds to the effect.
Yeah, because it didn't quite look slow motion.
No, because they're flying along, no problem, right? And looking around like, where the hell's the rest of the group? And the debris is slowly falling down around them. But I think that's from the slipstream.
That didn't click for me because I was like, it's not slow motion, but it is, and I'm like, I was very confused because especially being I think it was a few moments afterwards you do get that slow mo where the 109 is coming past.
Yes, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I really like that because I think that's the first time we've seen German aircraft up close for more than a second.
Yeah, locking eyes with the guy, literally.
Yeah, and so, but I don't think I can praise this enough though. Despite the little, the problems with the CGI and everything, this episode cannot be praised enough.
Yeah,
because even though a lot, in terms of the story, not a lot happens really, apart from Bubbles Payne getting killed and Egan getting shot down. But there's not a lot for the story. It's just this one mission where Rosie becomes, he's on the road to become the famous person we know him to be.
Yep.
And so, but it's nice to have these concentrated episodes like we had in Schweinfurt Regensburg. It's something close to focus on, and I think that's why it's so strong.
Yeah, no doubt. So and it's we think the series is great, and that's typically why we don't jump into the podcast and review the episode, because I think if people have tuned in by now, they figured out that we really like the series and we just kind of talk about a lot of the historical things. And but this should tell you like how damn good that episode was, right? Because I don't think in any of the prior one, other than the Regensburg episode, I think we jumped right in and said, well, this is the best episode. But this one is so it's going to be so rewatchable.
Yeah.
Um, there's we're starting to reach the point now where we're we're going to be 6 episodes in. We're 5 at this point,
Yeah.
where they really are having to condense the timeline because
Yeah.
there's so much to cover in so few episodes. So let's go ahead and start ruining it for people. Uh, so Bubbles Payne did not die on that mission. He died in April of 1944 over France, and I say that uncertainly because he's buried at Normandy American Cemetery. So he had to have gone down over
Yeah.
France. I can't remember where in France exactly he went down at.
Yeah, because in at that point in April 44, the Eighth is turning its operations predominantly against the rail network in France to try and soften them up, ready for D-Day.
Good point, Sam. And let's so while we're at that, this is October 1943. Where are we at? What's going on in the air war?
So, in terms of the Eighth specifically, they are struggling very hard. They are hitting hard against Germany, but they're taking such heavy knocks that, as we see in this episode, replacements aren't coming through, both in aircraft and men. And the losses are just horrific. And especially this week, Black Thursday, however you want to describe it, because it's where other parts of the Eighth, they have a second go at Schweinfurt, and the losses are even worse. But we talked in, I think it was the Schweinfurt Regensburg episode where how Ira Ake gets replaced by Jimmy Doolittle, and this is the final point in this in the war in Aker's career with the Eighth, is that the losses are mounting up so heavily. He's refusing to let the fighter groups go out and clear the skies in front of the bombers. So in the end, Eisenhower goes. I think Eisenhower recommends to Hap Arnold in Washington that someone else needs to take over the Eighth.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Doolittle is already in England. I think he's in a staff position with.
I think he was running the 15th Air Force at this point.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. He was in North Africa with the 15th.
Yeah, and they just pretty much did a switch.
Yeah, I'd say because Iraq goes down to the Mediterranean.
Yep.
And Jimmy Doolittle goes to the Eighth because the Eighth, while we don't want to diminish the 15th, the Eighth is the centerpiece of the US Air Force in Britain, in Europe, because it's hitting Germany at its core. I don't like Jimmy Doolittle at this point in the war, just because. So he goes out on missions with the 15th in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
And no one thought to say, no, don't do that, because he has access to the ultra intelligence network.
Oh,
and if
yeah.
the Germans discover that.
That's right.
And I'm like, no one thought to turn to him and say, stop being such a bloody idiot.
So as a quick sidebar there, I can't remember, it's in the Masters of the Air book, but there is an American general who went up and got shot down and he had clearance to Ultra, and the guy did such a good job of completely forgetting about it when he was in the POW camp that, like, when in post-war interviews he's like, I really don't remember what Ultra was. So that's an interesting point.
I think we should clarify, just for those who aren't familiar, Ultra is the Allied efforts to crack the Enigma, and at this point of the war, it's cracked.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of keeping up with the.
And the Germans don't know
this. Exactly. And if the Germans ever discovered that Enigma had been cracked, it would. I think it's fair to say it would basically shut off all Allied intelligence in Central Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So Sam mentioned Black Week, and that second Schweinfurt raid took place only 4 days after what we saw in this episode.
Yeah.
And crazy enough, it's just all about luck. So October 14th, 1943 is referred to as Black Thursday because the 8th Air Force again would lose 60 bombers in one afternoon. The 100th did not lose any on that day.
I didn't
However,
know that.
however, over the span of 3 days, because they flew 3 missions in a row, October 8th, 9th, and 10th. October 8th, 1943 being Bremen. We saw that last episode. They lost 7 B-17s. October 9th, 1943, they fly to Marienburg. They didn't lose any. And then at Munster, they lost 12 of 13. Um, just an absolute gut-wrenching mission. And I know that Regensburg on August 17th, 1943, they lost 7 or 8. I think maybe it was 9. I can't remember. But this was really the mission. This Munster mission was what basically gave them the nickname the Bloody Hundredth and got
Yeah.
them known as a hard luck outfit.
I mean, how many times in the war do you have one aircraft coming back out of a whole group? It's a handful. I can't even think of any other comparisons.
No, and
And that's
I can't either. And especially at a time where, like you said, that they're not replacing these aircraft as quickly as they should. And I've got it noted here, and they did mention it in the episode, but they were loaned 2 B-17s from the 390th bomb group.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the 100th went out with 20 B-17s, 7 had to abort. And you need as much firepower as you can get in the air. So when you lose, I mean, basically a third of your force
before you even get engaged, yeah.
And you're not able to be in a position where you're close enough to the other part of the 13th Combat Wing. So 13th Combat Wing is the 95th, the 100th, and the 390th. That's part of the reason why Rosenthal went into taking those evasive maneuvers when those 109s were trying to shoot him down, is he was too far away from the other part of the wing. So if he was going to try and climb to those guys and join in on their formation, he probably would have been shot down.
Definitely. And because we've talked a lot about how, the B-17, you don't have maneuverability, you don't have speed, you don't have armor, you only have that firepower. And the series has done a very good job of proving us wrong.
Yeah.
Proving it a contradiction all the time. But I think it's important to say these are the exceptions to the rule.
Absolutely.
What Rose is doing is that you need especially in daylight bombing, you need a tight formation with a lot of firepower. Without that, you're dead. Simple as that.
Yeah. And let's go ahead and talk about Royal Flush. So that was not Rosie's typical B-17. His regular B-17 was known as Rosie's Riveters. Great name. A big shout out to Bill de Blasio. So he was the tail gunner in Rosie's B-17, and a really nice piece of historical accuracy. When Rosenthal gets out of that B-17 and he looks around, and then there's the one crewman throwing up, that actually happened. That was the tail gunner, and it's believed that the tail gunner is said to have shot down. I'm going to say probably damaged rather than shot down. But he's said to have shot up 6 German fighters, and he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Yeah, so the tail
definitely
gunner,
well earned.
Yeah, the tail gunner was on top of his game that mission. The 2 waist gunners were named John Schaefer and Lauren Darling. They were the 2 seriously wounded crewmen. Darling recovered, and then Schaefer was sent home. He had a piece of shrapnel right next to his heart, but he still survived.
Oh.
And then what's crazy is, and this is mentioned in the book, and I'm surprised they didn't show this in the series. The ground crew pulled out an unexploded cannon shell from one of the wing tanks of Royal Flush.
This is just one of those, can you imagine being in this situation and coming to the ground, and it's like you've had all these lucky escapes, and it's like you've got to think your luck's up at this point.
Yeah.
And so you would not get, because in fact in the episode we see one of the chaps basically staging a mini mutiny and refusing to ever fly again.
Yeah.
I don't blame him. I do not blame him, because I bet there's some people watching that thinking, "Oh, what a coward," or something like that. But I'm like, I would never ever get in one of those aircraft, even at the beginning of the war, let alone
Yeah,
after all this.
yeah. It's and there's a reason why nobody says anything to that guy.
Yeah.
Although that'll change. There's a couple instances you read in the book where Rosenthal was a master motivator in getting guys to climb back inside that aircraft. Let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, so the collision, the
Ooh,
midair
yeah.
collision. There were midair collisions. I have not seen anything. And again, John Orloff, the series writer, has done a hell of a lot more research than I have. So I'm not faulting Mr. Orloff at all. Uh, the information that I came across was two B-17s collided with enemy fighters. So
Okay, so
that's
not each other.
yeah, and maybe they did. I don't know, but those are the notes that I have. And before we go any further, a huge thank you to World War II Wayfinder for that awesome video on
Yes.
the mission to Munster video that he did. That was great. We'll put that in the description link on our
Yeah.
YouTube version of this. But love your content, John. Really appreciate it.
So,
Um,
going back to that collision, and I wouldn't be surprised if it had happened, but no one wrote it down because, as we see in the episode, no one's got time to make records of what
yep,
aircraft are going down and what's happening to what.
yeah,
Because you're in a fight, you don't have time to do paperwork.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, I'm going to see if I can pull up the Red Bowman diary for that mission.
Oh yeah, we should have done that before. I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because this is probably one of the most gut wrenching yet easiest reports he's ever had to write. Because he hasn't got any information because there's only one crew left.
Yeah, there
But
just
also,
wasn't time to write shit down.
yeah. And how do you report something like that? Can you imagine being whoever reported it to the wing, reporting, oh yeah, we've only got one B-17 left?
Yeah.
How do you report something like that?
So here it is. Brief for Munster at 0730 hours. Heavy fog that is expected to clear by 11:30 hours takeoff time. Group can only put up 15 to 18 ships maximum, and we are awaiting replacement aircraft to cover our Bremen losses 2 days ago. 13 aircraft were dispatched to Munster today. One returned. Lieutenant Robert Rosenthal, thought to have been on his first mission. Actually, it was his third.
Yeah.
This mission practically disposed of the 100th in its original form. Major Egan was leading with Cruikshank. Not much is known of what happened. Rosenthal's crew too busy getting home against terrific opposition to do too much observing, which that's why you see in the interrogation that there's no record as
Yeah.
to some of the B-17s that they listed off. He came in on two engines with two men severely wounded. We know that rockets were fired by formations of Me-110s and Ju-88s accounted for many of our losses. And so the losses for the 13th Combat Wing between the 95th, 100th, and 390th were 25. So they lost 25 B-17s among three groups. And obviously the 100th taking the brunt of those losses with 12, the 390th with 8, and the 95th with 5. It's an absolutely gut punch of an episode.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
Go ahead, Sam. Go ahead.
I was just going to say because this is probably one of the strongest episodes because we were talking a little bit at the beginning about all three series in the trilogy, and this is probably one of the strongest out of all of them. But it's also this episode you could watch it on its own without having to watch the series
Yeah.
really, because apart from some references to Cleven, that's it. It basically stands on its own as its own film. As if it was a bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally true. It could have been like, Memphis Belle from the
Mm-hmm.
90s is one mission, one crew. You
Yeah.
definitely could have done that with this and called it a horror movie, not a war movie. So the target results on Munster, and again, there was concerns about bombing civilians or near civilians, and unfortunately, that is what happened. Not to say it hasn't happened before. It just maybe
Yeah.
not in as big of numbers from the 8th Air Force. 670 civilians were killed. There was damage to the city center and the cathedral. And then the 100th Bomb Group website doesn't show a bombing result for this mission, but I think bombs were on target. is pretty much what I've gathered as to what the effectiveness was. I would recommend people go check that out and get some information on it, because it's not sparse. It's just it's different depending on your source.
I think there's one quick thing I mean, because I'm hesitant we're running out of time, is that so far in the series it seems to be like they don't want to admit they're targeting civilians, as in the show's perspective of showing what's actually happening.
Yep.
Because, for example, in this episode, they talk about, obviously they're close to the church, but in reality, the actual aim point was the church itself.
Yeah, right.
And knowing full well it'd be full of civilians.
It's an easy point of reference in a big city like that.
You can't really miss it. So I think this is the only complaint I've got about the series. It feels like a little bit of whitewashing, I suppose.
Yeah, for now. God, who knows with that next episode?
Oh God, yeah.
Because we're gonna see some German civilians. Well, I mean, amongst many things, but German civilians taking out their anger on some of the American airmen. Haven't had the chance to mention this book yet, but if you want to find out more about particularly the Munster raid, Frank Murphy, who was a navigator in the 100th, he was part of the original group that came over to Thorpe Abbotts in 1943. He was on Brady's plane, I believe. Anyways, his account of bailing out and getting shot down was really good, very detailed. So if you want to find out more about what happened on that mission, I would highly recommend picking up Luck of the Draw. And then you can find out more about Hambone Hamilton, Cruikshank, who else? John Brady, which John Brady's a very prominent character in that book. Wish we got a little bit more of him in the series, but whatever. There's a lot of guys that have to get screen time. But okay, well, I didn't read. That was a quick 40 minutes, unfortunately.
Yeah, that did not seem.
But that's all right, because we're going to come back and at some point later on down the road do an extensive dive into this series. And we're going to watch the shit out of this episode. So we got 90 seconds. Next week is going to be crazy. We're going to have flak farms. We're going to have German civilians. We're going to have the Holocaust.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so when they're loading up in that marshalling yard.
Yes, of course.
We're going to have a run-in with the SS. God, what else? Egan getting captured. It looks like we're also going to get Stalag Lift 3, which we're going to have a special surprise for our viewing audience on that. One of our team members came up absolutely clutch, and we're going to get you some very special content regarding that. Really looking forward to talking about that and sharing it. I think that's about it for me, Sam. What do you got?
No, I was going to say it's just been a cracker of an episode, and say probably one of the best. And let's just hope the series carries on that way.
Yeah. So everybody stop bitching about CGI and enjoy the episode. And on that note, this is the Air War podcast presented by Pursuit Picks Media. My name is Mitchell Babarovich, joined by Sam Allen, and we will catch you guys next week for episode 6 of Masters of the Air.
Ta-ra.